All right, so we're doing something new. All right. So I'm going to start like a mini hybrid podcast thing, slash live stream, whatever you want to call this. Hopefully, in the future, we can keep making more of these, put this on Patreon, and go into detail about some of the theory that was left out in some videos or kind of had to be skimmed over for the sake of it being a video in the first place. With Capitalist Realism being our newest video and it being fairly popular, I figured this would be a good place to start. I've thought about doing this for a while now, and I felt bad that I haven't done it sooner. I would make videos, and there is just things that you just cannot put in there. It's like there's these little micro details that you just cannot get naturally all the time. Maybe, in another circumstance of making a video, it just happens to slip in. But naturally, you just can't articulate everything from a text. So we are going to look at capitalist realism. We're going to go into more detail about it. And hopefully be able to substitute and elaborate more on the theory of capitalist realism itself and maybe some of the ideas and concepts that Fisher presents. So obviously from the beginning, he starts out with, it is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism, right? We covered this in the video. This is a very Zizekian and Frederick Jameson, I think. Sorry, I can't remember names. That's kind of a phrase associated with those two people. And it's obviously for a book about capitalist realism, it embodies that realism to begin with, right? So we went into detail about this. This capitalist realism ultimately is something that is a psychological reality. It's a manifestation of an economic system that is so deeply ingrained ideologically and culturally that it's become a part of us. That's what this realism is it's something that completely alters and just changes the parameters in which we can think, right? So within a feudal society, you would expect that a lot of the cognition, the basic reasoning, was within a framework of feudalism of sorts. But what's different about capitalism is it puts on this appearance of being somewhat free, being somewhat non-constraining versus something feudalistic. In feudalism, obviously, you had the adherence to certain religious entities, or especially in the Middle Ages and Europe, or you ultimately had the adherence to a very cultural thing. And obviously, you hear this echoed throughout a lot of philosophers. You'll hear this from not necessarily in regards to feudalism, but Heidegger will talk about the barbarity of modernity and how it strips away our cultural essence and stuff like that. Nietzsche talks a little bit about that. Capitalism today is something far more technocratic. It's something far more. It's an inverse of what you would expect from feudalism, where it's just as dogmatic. It takes just as much hold as you psychologically, in a sense, and in a weird paradoxical way, where it convinces you that it doesn't. So obviously, this is a very Hegelian or Zizekian outlook at this. It's where Zizek thinks that we escape ideology through information, through education, and that's not the case. Ideology is our natural state. It's a paradox of sorts, and so that's what's so pervasive about this capitalism and this or rather postmodern capitalism and this capitalist realism itself. So that is the essence, really, of the book. We covered that quite a bit in this video. Let's go to. I was going to look at something that was really interesting. I think one part that I really wish I would have put in more is that Fisher talks explicitly about how the most revolutionary way of thinking about capitalism has actually came from Deleuze and Guattari. And I the way he puts this, I agree. He shows a kernel of this reasoning through Marx and Engels. Actually, they almost, in a way, this is really prophetic. We put this quote in the video, but I'm going to go ahead and reread it again. Capital has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervor, of chivalrous enthusiasm, of Philistine sentimentalism, in the icy water of egotistical calculation. It has resolved personal worth into exchange value, and in place of the numberless and defeasible chartered freedoms, has set up the single unconscionable freedom, free trade. In one word, for exploitation. Veiled by religious and political illusions, it has substituted naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. That is a very prophetic sort of Deleuzian way of looking at capitalism. The idea that Marx and Engels both were able to look at how capitalism rips away the Philistine sentimentalism, and how it completely overrides everything. In a weird way, the traditional way of looking at a Marxist critique isn't quite that. It's more of a jagged analysis, right? It's more of I want to say almost Orwellian, right? Where what was the quote from Orwell that the future is the boot on your head? I think a lot of the analysis from Marx, traditional Marxists, was one of complete, I want to say totalitarianism, right? Like capitalism had this very authoritative power over people, and it was a force to be reckoned with. And the way they talk about this is it's something more slippery. It's much more elastic. It hides its face. And obviously this isn't the only quote where Marx and Engels said this, but like this isn't the direct analysis that you would essentially take with a traditional form of Marxism, right? Especially with class struggle and stuff like that. It seems like a very direct and very transparent approach to everything. And obviously, with the developments of 20th century theory and philosophy, we see that the ideas around what capitalism is has changed a lot. And this quote right here is sort of that kernel, that beginning of this reasoning. Obviously, so Fisher says Deleuze and Guattari describe capitalism as a kind of dark potentiality which haunted all previous social systems. Capital, they argue, is the unnameable thing, the abomination, which primitive and feudal societies warded off in advance. That's also pretty crazy too, right? Because I think this goes back to almost a very early form of continental philosophy. This sounds very Nietzschean as well. It's a world where reason, these jagged numerical ways of being, right? So like under capitalism, your life is an abstraction of numbers. It's how much profit can I exploit. It's this very, very explicit and very, very robotic way of living in a way, right? It takes away the religious fervor. It takes away the cultural things that make us human, right? And in a way, you could draw this as psychoanalysis as well, which Fisher does here. There is this like subconscious approach to the unnameable thing, the future in which it's the innate fear that what you have culturally will be gone. And in a way, he almost talks about this could be like the actual essence of like conservatism, right? It's this unnameable thing and fear that can control societies in a way. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I wish I would have included that. This really, the beginning of the book, he's just explaining what this realism is and actually really getting into the very abstract base details about what capitalism is and the complete makeup of it, right? So what a lot of people and what we would initially think capitalism is, based off a lot of prior theory, is something incredibly transparently authoritarian, something where, like, here's an example. As a political scientist, this is something that's a lot of people, I think quite a few scholars are looking at this now. They're looking at authoritarianism and how it's changed, right? Authoritarianism of the past was pretty upfront in a way that it was authoritarian, right? It was pretty clear. You don't fuck with the state. You don't fuck with whoever is in power, or bad things are going to happen. And while that certainly exists in any totalitarian or authoritarian state, it's a lot more slippery now, right? So Russia is the perfect example of this. Under Putin, you're free to do these things. Russia's constitution, for example, is actually a fairly progressive piece of work. It's arguably, I think it's more progressive than the United States Constitution. The problem is no one follows it, and they don't have to follow it. So you can do all of these things legally, but if people in power don't like it, they'll find a way to close down your business. They'll find a way to essentially move past these barriers, these laws. And it's a very slippery form of authoritarianism today. So let's look, what is the next chapter in this? Here's another one that we didn't go into detail about. Chapter 2, Fisher talks about what if you held a protest and nobody came. Obviously, we did go into detail about this with Wall-E, that a lot of corporate activism has taken place throughout the 21st century, right? So it's something where capitalism consumes its critiques, right? Where you set up a critique of capitalism, but capitalism is so good at consuming it that the only critique of capitalism can exist within a commodity. For example, Wall-E. It is a very anti-capitalist film in a lot of ways, but in order to consume that, in order to get that anti-capitalism, you have to consume it via a commodity, or you have to purchase your way into consuming something like this. And so capitalism benefits from its very critiques. We see this in an industry level as well with things like Tesla, right? So more than anything, Tesla's the most perfect example of this, right? Where, sure, electric cars are good. It's an improvement over gasoline-powered vehicles. But the problem you run into is if you really want to address the climate catastrophe, climate change, it's actually not individual vehicles, right? Really, if we wanted to tackle climate change, it would take a very large political force to shut down our current fossil fuel industry, and it would require an extremely efficient, probably centralized approach to green energy, right? It would require immediate investment, probably from the public sector via the government. It's not going to be something that the private sector is going to immediately solve, probably within the time it needs. But what Tesla is able to do is they're able to present a surface level solution to this, electric vehicles, but it doesn't really solve the fundamental issue. It makes you think as if it does. Buying a Tesla gives you good consciousness. You're performing your pro green energy activism, your pro environmentalism by purchasing a Tesla car. So ultimately, what happens is people hold protest from a very individual place, right? So in order for me to do a good deed, to be a good citizen, I purchase or I protest, I consume anti-capitalist commodities per se, and it's a very individual. It's a very individual endeavor. It's a protest where no one is there except you. So capitalism is able to single everything out and completely wipe away the rest. So let's look at chapter 3. We talked about this, where capitalism can be used as an application of the real, right? So if I'm thinking about this correctly, the Lacanian real is something almost, I might be getting this wrong. It's almost something metaphysical in a sense, right? That is the most real thing, and that's like that is like the essence of our being is the real. Obviously, Zizek and Mark Fisher being fairly Zizekian, he doesn't take this approach to the real. He likes using Lacanian psychoanalysis as an application, right? He likes using the structures of psychoanalysis as a way to look at things, as a framework, right? So obviously, we cover the sublime object of ideology. Zizek says, fuck the content of psychoanalysis. The content doesn't matter. Like, it really, at the end of the day, that's not what's really important about psychoanalysis. Herbert Marcuse made a similar argument with Eros and Civilization. Zizek, oddly enough, has some issues with Eros and Civilization, I believe. But undoubtedly, he took something from Marcuse. Marcuse sort of said the same thing with Freudian psychoanalysis. But Mark Fisher uses capitalism in the real. We use the example, which Mark Fisher used the example as climate catastrophe, right? Where, again, we can't even reason. Like, climate catastrophe is this void. It is this complete unknowing thing that suddenly finds itself in our surface reality. There's glimpses of this real, of climate catastrophe. Obviously, for people listening to theory and people who are probably politically involved, politically aware, they think about these things pretty often. This might seem a little bit confusing to us because it's like, well, what the fuck? Like, we know climate catastrophe is going to happen at any moment. Everyone knows in a way that climate catastrophe is going to happen at any moment. But the reasonable response, and the response that a lot of people take, is like, I just don't think about it. Why would I? And why would they? Like, really? Like, it's especially we talked about new nihilism with this. Why would you even worry yourself about complete Armageddon and catastrophe? You're not really going to help it anyways. And so people sort of subconsciously shut down when they hear things like this. And climate catastrophe, the end of capitalism, the end of life as we know it, is this real? So this one was one of my favorites that I did not include. And it's the fourth chapter where Fisher talks about reflexive impotence, immobilization, and a liberal communism, right? So this reflexive impotence is this this new nihilism, this absolutely dreadful, this like utterly depressive state of being that we haven't even completely contended with. This is one of the biggest sources of mental health woes, as Mark Fisher sees it. We didn't also talk about mental health as much. I know, I think I have it. It's under this pile of books, but Ghost of My Life by Mark Fisher. I think he goes much more into detail about mental health and capitalism. And I wanted to try to separate those things if possible, as to make two separate videos that made sense. Or I think mental health and capitalism, which really catches a lot of Mark Fisher fans, we could make an actual third video with that, because I'm going to make a video about Ghost of My Life. I didn't include too much mental health in this because I believe some of the only Mark Fisher videos I have seen has to do with mental health and capitalism. But this reflexive impotence, it's this lack of political strength, the lack of any coherent drive to change things, because it's just absolutely useless and it's utterly worthless. And and Fisher talks about, it's not that like people don't necessarily care, right? A lot of young people are far more, their politics are far more activist based. But in contrast, the young people who don't do anything quite literally don't do anything, right? So I think there's actually been some research, and I don't know if Fisher talks about this. I can't quite remember. I can't remember where I heard this, where it's the people of the past, Gen X, baby boomers, across the board, there was probably more in number political participation, right? But where people did partake politically, they just sort of went along the lines. They towed the status quo line. There wasn't a very activist approach to politics compared to our current generation, Gen Z, later millennials. And then, of course, we see this with the 1920s, and I think it was the silent generation. The Great Depression created a generation that was incredibly active politically and very passionate. And so we're seeing that today. But for the people who do not partake in politics, it is this new special form of nihilism that Mark Fisher thinks we've never really seen before. And it's this pervasive idea of just being able not to do anything. There's this massive reflexive impotence. So, and then he brings up something else, and I love this, called liberal communism. And obviously, you hear liberal communism, you're like, what the fuck? His example, and I love this, is I was cracking up when I was reading this. He uses Bill Gates as liberal communism, and is the most perfect fucking example ever. He uses Bill Gates as an example where Bill Gates is this massive billionaire, right? He's got huge hegemonic control over a certain market, pretty much. I mean, like, Windows dominates most computers. He completely controls this sector, yet there's nothing about him that seems inherently wealthy. Like, he doesn't seem that special. If you saw Bill Gates, he wears clothes from like Walmart and shit, I believe. I'm pretty sure he does wear clothes that are from Walmart that are incredibly cheap. He's a normal guy in that regard. So, right, where liberalism or liberal democracy it seeks to lower these hierarchies, right? And in a liberal communist cultural society, which Mark Fisher thinks that's kind of where we're going. We're going into like liberal communism. Really, it's just a cultural facade. It's a smokescreen per se. It's not completely real. It's obviously not communism, and liberal communism is pretty antithetical to each other. But he puts on this approach of a very normal person, yet he's incredibly rich. And so he says there's this approach to wealth and status that doesn't match the typical Marxist analogy of like the bourgeoisie, right? The bourgeoisie and ruling classes of the past were much quicker. They were easier to identify, rather. Sorry, guys. I'm kind of bad at this live talking, so forgive me. I hope this is making sense and I'm talking okay. Okay, so let's move on to, let's see. And then here, Mark Fisher talks about don't let yourself get attached to anything. I think this was the biggest thing that I did not put in the video completely. I obviously made some references to nomadism, this post-Fordist economic society that we were living in. Of course, in the video, we talked about what Fordism was, this economic line work, where you did the same menial task, where individuality was not permitted. You needed to be a part of a cohesive whole, and you were alienated from your labor in that regard. And today we're living in something post-Fordist, right? Something much more elastic, where you do want to be an individual. They want you to stand out amongst the crowd. One clip that got copyright striked, and it was still copyright striked, that were the other clips of the movie, but I was going to include in this video was the scene from Office Space. And if you guys have seen Office Space, Mark Fisher brings this up, and it is a wonderful scene. It's fucking beautiful. It's extremely depressing, but it's so on the spot that it's what, dude, if you haven't seen Office Space, it is amazing. I mean, it's the best. Talk about like this consuming, like this anti-capitalist like thing. Yeah, I mean, it is like WALL-E in that regard, but holy fuck, it's so good, dude. You guys got to watch it. But anyways, this scene in Office Space is what's it? The main character's girlfriend, why am I forgetting? Jennifer Aniston, that's her. She's working at this restaurant, right? And she comes in with a vest, right? And part of the job is to wear it's called these flares or pins. It's like you just attach certain random things to your vest. And she came in, and the minimum was 15, right? In order to go out on the floor to serve and wait people, you had to have at least 15 flare on. 15 pieces of flare, sorry. And her boss comes up to her, and he's like, 15 pieces of flare, huh? She's like, yeah, like, is that a problem? And he's like, yeah, we need to talk about this. He's like, look, do you want to do the bare minimum, right? You only are required to wear 15, but do you really want to do that? We don't really like that. We want you to go above and beyond. And she's like, oh, okay. She was like, okay, well, I'll put on more flare. And she was like, so you want me to put on more flare? And the boss could not tell her what to do. He could not, because the rule was that you only required 15 pieces of flare. Therefore, he was not going to punish her. He was not going to terminate her for not wearing it, but he was going to make her life more difficult.
I was having lunch, and
We need to talk about your flare.
Really? I have 15 pieces on.
Well, okay, 15 is the minimum. Okay?
Okay.
Now, it's up to you whether or not you want to just do the bare minimum, or, well, like Brian, for example, has 37 pieces of flare on today, okay? A terrific smile.
Okay, so you want me to wear more?
Look, Joanna,
Yeah.
people can get a cheeseburger anywhere, okay? They come to Tchotchkes for the atmosphere and the attitude. Okay, that's what the flair's about. It's about fun.
Yeah. Okay, so more than, yeah?
Look, we want you to express yourself, okay? Now, if you feel that the bare minimum is enough, then okay, but some people choose to wear more, and we encourage that, okay? You do want to express yourself, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay, great. That's all I ask.
Okay.
It was this unwritten rule that's found in a post-Fordist workforce where written rules are made up on the spot, right? So, for example, here's a personal anecdote of mine. This is something I'm sure all of you guys have dealt with. I worked at a guitar center for about a year when I was like the beginning part of my, really it was my freshman year of college. I worked at a guitar center, and the base responsibilities I had at the beginning were pretty okay. Like I was only making $9 an hour, so it's like, fuck that shit. I'm not going to go above and beyond and do that. I was not going to. And then what happened is slowly but surely there was more responsibilities that were being tacked on with no extra pay at all. And they would load you up until you absolutely couldn't take it anymore and you quit. That was their entire business model. They never broke their own rules. There was just new unwritten rules that were made up on the spot. And that is extremely indicative of this post-Fordist economic world that we are living in, where you are encouraged, very, very deeply encouraged, to go above and beyond your work responsibilities, and you're encouraged to put on a very fake smile and love what you do at all times, where work doesn't escape you. There is no separation. So Mark Fisher talks about how, at least in line work, you didn't talk for 8 hours. You did the same thing, and the minute you went home, typically that you're gone. Like your work is completely separate. You get home, you're free. In a post-Fordist work world, that is sure as fuck not it. With this pandemic going on, I think we're going to be seeing that become an even larger reality, where people are going to be asked to work from home. I don't see the future of work taking place in office spaces anymore. It's going to be at your own house, and you're going to be looking to work about 12 to 15-hour work days. Obviously, I don't know if this will end up happening, but I have no doubt something like this will happen. And again, it's indicative of this elastic, not structured work world that we are living in. And to go back to what we were talking about, I guess that this goes into it, is number 5 or chapter 5. He says, "Don't let yourself get too attached to anything." And so nomadism is required, right? I can't remember where I saw this. I think it was my first. So, when you're in college, you have to take these fucking bullshit like introduction, like College 101 or like College 100, like bullshit class. And the one thing that she stressed to us, like, if you want to have a good paying job, if you're willing to move, you're good to fucking go. Like, you are good to go. You will literally, like, you will fucking make it. If you go to work and that's all you do, say you go move to another city, you have no family there, you have no friends for the most part, and you dedicate your life to work, dude, you'll be rich as fuck. Like, it doesn't matter. So long as you have a degree and you do that, and that's what they encourage you to do. I remember being told, like, guys, like, your opportunities might take you to a lot of different places. And of course, this professor was super like excited about it. She's like, guys, your life, wow, you could, we live in Kansas City, you're going to school in the middle of nowhere, Independence, Missouri. But like, guess what? You could go to fucking Chicago and get paid $50K a year, and you're working 50 hours a week, and you have no friends or family there. But you know what? If you're willing to move, you're going to make it just fine. And that's this, like, Mark Fisher talks about the loss of home, the loss of this sentimentalism, right? We're going back to this quote from Marx and Engels, which is insanely, it is so unbelievably prophetic. Like, I don't think we even like think about how insane that quote is. It destroys Philistine sentimentalism. Sentimentalism does not exist anymore, right? It just doesn't. Everything is a number crunch. Everything is just raw productivity. And then today, what's even more important is that it's a very elastic form of that, right? That's the biggest difference. Is, of course, before it was pure productivity, number crunching. But there was this separation, right? And you go home. It's not like that now. It is continual. Like today, work never leaves you. And so you cannot get attached too much. Mark Fisher uses the example of the film Heat. I've actually never seen this film. Oddly enough, I've seen like clips on YouTube, so I know exactly what he's talking about. Heat is like a crime movie. It has what's his name? He's always in fucking Scorsese's movies. He's in Goodfellas. He's in the Irishman. Robert De Niro. I know he's in it. I think it's about these very professional bank robbers that they're not friends. They're not a part of a gang. Mark Fisher talks about how the Italian mafia were ultimate sentimentalists. They were all about family. They were, especially when you see in The Godfather, they were about honor. That's like what the Godfather, the original Godfather, was about, was this this dying breed of gangsters who sat down with other leading crime groups and they would work things out. And with the use of narcotics coming into the market and stuff, that completely falls apart. And quite literally, The Godfather, by the time the second and third hits, it was all out war by the end of the first movie, and it was the end of this sentimental code of honor, right? And in Heat, Fisher talks about there's this representation in this movie, Heat, where they're all like numb. They're all unemotional professionals who just go rob banks, or they go rob. They partake in very, very, very organized crime. They're not friends with with each other. They know at any moment that they would leave those people behind if something bad happens. It's a part of the code. They don't know anyone by their own names in this organization, and that's it. That's quite literally it. Again, I have not seen the movie, but I'm just going off of what I've read, and I've oddly seen a lot of clips from Heat. I should watch it, but that's today. That's our economic worldview today. We can't get too attached to anything. We have to be nomadic. There is no home today. Everything is just completely consumed by production, by capital, by the pursuit of money. So let's go to... All right, and then here, I brought this up in the video, but I didn't bring up the concept of... Or I did bring up the concept, just not in name, per se, but Mark Fisher states at the beginning of chapter 6, all that is solid melts into PR, market Stalinism, and bureaucratic anti-production. So again, we talked about this market Stalinism, right? I actually, oddly enough, I got a couple messages from a lot of really angry people. Dude, I don't know what it is. Again, someone who's like read a lot of like Marxist-Leninist theory. I'm not like a lot of what Lenin says is it's I don't feel completely antithetical to it whatsoever, but it really fucking pissed people off when I talked about how this market Stalinism in the video was the approach to production. It was the facade of production, yet it wasn't really productive, right? So the White Sea, I believe Baltic Canal, that Stalin built, was an extremely huge engineering feat, and he used prison labor to do so. That's a complete fucking fact. I don't even want to get into that. That is an undeniable fact. Whatever. He used prison labor, and then he built a canal that 20th century boats couldn't actually go through, like a lot of them. Like the only boats that would actually fit through this canal were a select few. Nonetheless, he touted this as some huge engineering feat where he would take people to take pictures of this canal. I believe Jean-Paul Sartre, Stalin, I believe he went to Russia and he was shown this canal and how great it was. Jean-Paul Sartre being the very dedicated communist that he was. But regardless of what you think from a theoretical lens of Stalinism, that's a complete separate thing. What is true is that we can at least apply this approach to production to a lot of the neoliberal capitalism that we see today, right? So we used the example of constant auditing under teachers, right? So teachers are continually being forced to adhere to the appearance of education rather than education itself. where administrators will come into your lectures at all times. You have to adhere to this really strict guideline. Essentially, academic freedom is sort of dying under this neoliberal approach to education. And Mark Fisher obviously has a ton of experience with this, being a professor himself. I can only imagine how that probably felt. That was probably pretty. That's just I could put myself in his shoes there, and that's really shitty. And that's kind of the essence of this book. Is it's just it's just disturbing at every level. I mean, it's beautifully relevant, like I said in the video, but it's brutal, man. I mean, I think this is the most, I gotta say, I think this is the most brutal book I have ever read. I think it's the most relevant book on capitalism as a system I have read. I know Mark Fisher obviously takes a lot from Jameson and in postmodernism, or the cultural logic of late capitalism. I believe that's what it's called. That's the base of this book, is that book. But he just builds off of it in a ways, and he uses a lot of film analysis to make examples. And it was actually pretty hard on my mental health making this video. I'll be honest. We included most things in this video. There's not a lot that we left out, but there was some things that I wanted to add in there about the nomadism portion of post-Fordism. Let's see if there's any. Here we go. Chapter 7 goes into the loss of the future, how history sort of overlaps, and it's this new, weird, pervasive entity that we can't reconcile. We can't put our finger on it. It puts us into a complete state of subconscious confusion, is probably the best way to put it. He quotes in this: "If you can watch the overlap of one reality with another, capitalist realism as dream work and memory disorder." So yeah, this capitalist realism presents us with a massive memory disorder where essentially the future's gone. And what he means by this confused a lot of people. I've seen on like r/philosophy, people were like, what the fuck does Mark Fisher mean by like the future's gone? What Mark Fisher means by the future is gone is that in this 21st century world, and he even he sees this in the 90s as well. He says he found this idea in the 90s, and obviously it became way more true in the 21st century, is that the 21st century today, it's a recycling of the 20th century, right? So it's an aesthetic recycling of 1970s, 80s, 90s, 60s, like clothing you see with art. In a capitalist world, the most efficient thing to do is to not innovate too much. It's to use and recycle. Therefore, there's not going to be this massive creative essence that we may have seen prior to a very postmodern capitalist system that we are in today, where the most efficient thing is just to simply recycle things. But obviously what that does to us is it puts us into a state of this weird subconscious confusion and nihilism, right? Obviously, I mean, you could make a video about our current new nihilism I've thought about doing this. I could make an entire separate video about nihilism and this postmodern capitalism and this capitalist realist society that we are living in. It's totally different from a lot of prior nihilism, right? It's like an anti-nihilism. It's a nihilism that convinces you of the opposite, where a lot of the Nietzschean anxieties of the past, or it was the loss of culture under modernity, of science. Obviously, well, not obviously. Some of you guys know I'm actually doing my next video on Birth of a Tragedy. I'm working on it right now, but of this, if you guys have read Birth of a Tragedy, of this Apollonianism, I can't talk. Essentially, where the Apollo energy from art is the rational, logical, scientific, artistic instinct, but essentially that has taken over modernity. And Nietzsche was he was concerned about that in a lot of ways. And so, but today it's like it's something different. It's like our nihilism comes from having no sense of time in a way. And this gets a little bit confusing and a little bit deep, but Nietzsche predicts this as well, where he says we're going to live in a world. Mark Fisher lays this out where, oh, and this fucking hit me so hard, dude. We're going to live in a world where, we can already predict everything. Like nothing you do is going to matter anymore because we've already seen it. So Mark Fisher uses the example of Kurt Cobain. Kurt Cobain embodied that. Kurt Cobain was smart enough to understand that, like, dude, of course MTV sucks my dick all the time. I'm being interviewed all the time. People freak out when they see us, but like, we're just normal dudes from Seattle making music. We're not doing anything that fucking special. We've seen this before with Jim Morrison. We've seen this with Hendrix. We've seen this with fucking Led Zeppelin. Like what the fuck are we doing all that special? It doesn't matter. I'll be replaced in 10 years. Kurt Cobain was this character of really, like, he was a very self-aware person. And Nietzsche sees that eventually we're going to we're going to get into a state of complete self-awareness, and that self-awareness pacifies us because we're convinced of not being able to change anything. And that's fucking powerful stuff right there, if you ask me. That was one of the most jarring parts of this book, if you ask me. This new nihilism. It's not obviously very separate of nihilism as a whole. It just takes on a different tone and relevancy of this world. Let's see, so into chapter 8 itself as well. Mark Fisher talks about how there's no central exchange, right? So something that neoliberalism promised was to essentially kill the public sector, where regulation would intervene when necessary, and that we'd create a more efficient economic system. Obviously, that's not fucking true whatsoever. There is no central exchange to anything really under this private neoliberal system that we live in. And he says that this exists in the sense that you have to go through a PR apparatus. He also uses the example, and he claims that Franz Kafka, he almost prophesized this. He saw a world where you would call these intermediate groups when you needed help, and they just sucked. It was pure bureaucracy, and it was terrible. And it's like, think about whenever you call a smaller company and they have shitty customer service, right? You're on the phone the whole time, and you're getting pissed. Oh, God damn it, I keep hitting my microphone. You're getting pissed, and they can't help you with anything. And throughout that entire process, a lot of people take it out on the workers. So it's this insane cycle of bureaucracy that hurts everyone. It even hurts the companies that don't invest in their customer service. You know, like, you lose customers to an extent. But that is the central neoliberal practice, is to not invest in those things. It's to invest into this recycled bullshit economic system that doesn't even focus on innovation or I want to say, like, care for the consumer themselves. So there is no central exchange. You always have to go through some weird, very inefficient bureaucratic entity under this neoliberal capitalism. And that exists in a lot of ways. Mark Fisher uses call centers as being probably the most relevant example. And I remember call centers have developed a lot through the years. Call centers are better now, typically. But he wrote this in 2010. And I remember when I was younger, oddly enough, the very few times I would call customer service, or I'd see my mom call customer service, it was a lot worse. Amazon today fucking monopolizes everything, and their customer service is god tier. As terrible as they are, their customer service is pretty good. Okay. I think we've covered just about everything that I didn't include in the book, or sorry, in the video. Sorry if this is a little bit loose, and sorry if this is a little bit informal. I want to do this with about every video that we do. I want to be able to cover the concepts we couldn't go into detail about enough. Obviously, with this, I'm going to add a couple graphics when needed. I want this to be sort of a hybrid-like podcast system where I can make a probably, for lack of a better word, a lower quality video that is more accessible to people on the go, right, in podcast form, and or people who just want to get more information or whatever about a video. We go into more detail about it. So I'm going to be doing this with Birth of a Tragedy. I think I'm going to be doing this for about every video that we make going forward. So that's it. I mean, that's really it. I think it's a very short book, Capitalist Realism. We covered just about everything in the video. There was just some few key concepts that I wanted to go into. The liberal communism with Bill Gates, I thought, was an extremely good example. Going into detail about the more office space examples that I wasn't able to include in the video because I got copyright striked. So that's really it, guys. That's Capitalist Realism. And I think we're doing this. It's like 50 minutes now. So that's it. Let me know, guys, if you have any questions, critiques, or anything, how you may want to see this going forward. I also want to add that I'm going to try to actually get people on here. I might do some more interview-like setups. I've talked to a few people. We might have people on here, and I'm going to make this all Patreon exclusive content. Patreon really is my lifeblood right now. This is actually how I am able to survive. And I want to be able to, add something palpable to this and make it worth your while to at least shell out that extra cash every month for me. It obviously helps a lot, but I also want to be able to provide a little bit more. And my videos can't cover everything. If I was to do this about the sublime object of ideology, I'd have to. I would make a whole thing about Hegel because I couldn't quite include a lot of the Hegelian points that Zizek was making. For the sake of a video, that video is already almost 40 minutes long. So that's it, guys. Hopefully, we went into detail about some stuff that wasn't included in the video. We talked about some things that were just interesting to begin with. Yeah, this is my first time doing this. Sorry if it was a little sloppy, a little messy. I wanted this to be a little bit informal. I don't want this to be incredibly scripted. I want it to be a little bit more laid back. So hopefully it turned out all right. So thank you guys for watching.